Yellow,
Hey,
here we are.
yay.
Hi, Katie.
Hey, Warden, how's it going?
Very good. I'm excited to see you. I'm sorry I missed your call last week. I will give you a call tomorrow to catch up on business.
Yeah, all good.
Cool. I see Dylan Bowman.
Yeah. Hi.
Yes.
Squad,
Hey,
how is
buddy.
everyone?
Good, man. How you doing?
Good. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, dude, for sure. I want to just give everybody a couple minutes to come in. I've Dylan, I don't know if you saw this on my stupid Instagram story, but like 2 or 3 weeks ago, I just threw out an invite to see if anybody wanted to train with me through the rest of the year. And like I'm kind of like I like the camaraderie of gym training when I can go and like work out with other people. So like COVID's kind of sucked because working out in my garage by myself is really boring. So I just threw this challenge out there. I was like, hey, if anybody wants to sync up and like do a challenge for the rest of the year and just train and like set your own goal, let's do it. And I think I got 55 or 60 people that were like, yeah, I'm in. And I was like, oh my god. So I got I think 35 people total to commit to the challenge, and they've set goals. And I like committed to all these people to like try to have interesting conversations with athletes and trainers and record it and share it just to try to help people along. So that's why we're here.
That's awesome, man. No, I think it's a great idea, and community is everything when it comes to exercising. And I've missed my community as well. Even though
Yeah.
we can get together a little bit more than you can when you're going to a CrossFit box or your local gym or whatever. So I think it's awesome. I appreciate you guys having me.
Yeah.
Thanks for
It's always
being
fun
here.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
for
great.
sure. It's funny because we have an interesting group. But from my time like working in the CrossFit business to now at Red Bull and a couple of other things have like kind of accumulated, so random friends from all over the world. And also some people have like decided to join this challenge whom I've actually never even met face to face. So we have I don't know, we have 7 or 8, 9 people on the call here. I'm going to record it and then send it out to everybody. But it's cool. It's a very eclectic group. And just to speak really quickly to like the goals that people have set, they're kind of all over the place. Like my initial goal was I wanted to drop 15 pounds by the end of the year. We've got other people that want to lose weight. Some people want to run a couple 100 miles. There's a really wide variety of goals. And it's been very interesting to see the goals that people pick and the way they're progressing towards them. And so I think that'll play a role in most of our conversation today is goal setting and training and like a little bit of your background. And I want to talk about running. I really hate running myself, but I put my Hokas on for this conversation. I know that Lucy makes fun of me for owning Hokas. I think Lucy calls them chunky boys or something, but I'm a chunky
Chunky
boy. So.
boys. Lucy rocks Hokas. Come on,
Does
Lucy
he?
rocks Hokas. Oh yeah.
Yeah, right. Cool. So and
Dylan, that's
he's
supposed to be
here.
our secret. That's our secret.
Busted.
Busted for the Hokas. So here's how we're gonna do this. I'm just gonna kind of Q&A with you for a bit. And Lucy, since you're Dylan's athlete manager, please feel free to pick up the slack when I sound like an idiot. But I also want to leave a few minutes at the end to open up for conversation and questions from everybody that's joined, whether that's training questions or diet or gear or whatever. I think you've got some obviously got some excellent knowledge to impart on us. So for everybody that's on the call and everybody that watches this, Dylan Bowman is a great human being. He's a world-class athlete. He's an ultra runner. He happens to be a Red Bull athlete, but that's not why I brought him in today. He's got a number of fastest known time records on a bunch of trails from all over the world. You got FKTs in Europe and beyond, right? I know you've got many in America.
Well, it's kind of a sore subject, Chris, and I can go into the details if you want me to. But actually, what I'm most known for as it comes to FKTs is that they all get broken like immediately after I break the record. Most recently, I broke the record around Mount Rainier here in the Northwest this summer. And I broke the record by an hour and a half. And then 5 days later, somebody came and broke my record, which was a little disappointing. But I have, I guess, I have been successful all over the world. I've won races, in Asia, North America, Australia, New Zealand. Yeah, so no stranger to racing and competing internationally. And the fastest known time thing is something I just have to get a little better at.
Well, and Lutzi can back me up on this one. When he and I went with Payson to the White Rim, and Payson hit that FKT, and we were all so excited and like high fives. And I mean, we barely got home before some asshole got out and beat his time on it. And
Exactly.
I personally I was like, man, I feel like someone's beat my record. It felt terrible.
Yeah. I mean, not to blow Lutzi's spot either, but he, I think, was just as upset as I was when my record went down in August. And I had to basically convince him that the guy who broke it wasn't a complete slime ball, but that he was in fact a fairly nice guy, and that his intentions weren't to break my heart, even though that's ultimately what happened. But it's all, it's all fair game in sport. And so Payson and I definitely share that feeling, doing a big project that you focus on for months and having 5 days of glory before that's snatched from you. So it's all good though. Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, known for FKTs, have had many successful 100-mile races. Obviously Red Bull sponsored athlete, North Face, Pro Tech, Trail Butter, on and on. Dylan's got a lot of great sponsors. And you also have a podcast, which seems to be going pretty well. Can you talk about that a little bit? Why do you do that with all that you have going on?
Well, again, it ties back to Aaron Lutzi, the best athlete manager in the history of the world. I told him I wanted to do this a few years ago, and he basically gave me no excuse to not do it anymore. In other words, he helped me to get everything that I needed, and provided a lot of moral support along the way. And, even with that, I still drug my feet forever. And I'm somebody who loves sport. I love talking about sport. I love doing this stuff. I listen to sports talk radio every day. I know it sounds nerdy and goofy, but it's something I've done since I was a kid. Nowadays, it's mostly like talk radio podcasts. I don't listen to the radio live anymore, but I listen to the replays, and I've just always loved the medium. I was an early adopter to podcast listening. I mean, I was listening to Bill Simmons back in like 2011, 2012, back before everybody had their own podcasts. And so finally I got mine off the ground, and yeah, I've been having an absolute ball with it. In fact, I recorded an episode today with a guy who I met when I was volunteering at the San Quentin State Prison in California. He was serving a life sentence at the time. He's since gotten out, and I had him on the podcast to discuss kind of our relationship and trying to be an athlete inside a prison, and how running's helped him to become a better version of himself. And so that's like the microcosm of what I want to do with the show is, go a little bit deeper than surface level conversation about sport performance, but have deeper conversations with interesting people. And it's been a great project. And if you're interested, it's called The Well. You can find it on all the major podcasting platforms. It's mostly running related, but I've had some other sort of interesting people on, including Sasha DeJulian, who's also a Red Bull athlete, world-class rock climber. So it kind of goes all over the place, but with an endurance and running focus.
Cool. Have you, has any of the guests on that show, like imparted some real like meaningful wisdom to your sport specifically that you've implemented, or like how has doing the well actually helped you as an athlete, or has it?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess the first episode I think was one that is a special one for me for a couple of reasons. Number one, obviously, like it got the show off the ground finally after years and years of thinking about it and talking about it. But I spoke with a guy who's a friend of mine whose name's Carlton McCoy, and he's a master sommelier. And we're about the same age, and we used to work together at a hotel in Aspen, Colorado. So he was the sommelier and I worked in management on sort of like the room side of the hotel business. And, you know, so we were both sort of young for our positions in the hotel, but he was like this young phenom as it relates to the world of food and beverage, and became the youngest ever to pass the master sommelier exam when he was like 29. It took him only 2 tries. It usually takes people like 7. And so I guess, you know, to answer your question, I can't think of anything off the top of my head that was like, you know, let's implement this into training to be a better athlete. But it's more like a curiosity of like, what is the core like source that like drives us, you know, as human beings, like things that actually move us to perform at our best, to achieve great things. And for him, it's always been, you know, this fascination that he's had with wine and how it represents culture and region and landscape, and consolidating all that into like a knowledge and a practice. And then once you have this general mastery of it, also being able to specialize and focus on wines of Greece and wines of Northern Italy, whatever, and get even more in depth and even more specialized in order to keep your skills at a high level. So never resting on your laurels, never just being content with having this credential of being a master sommelier, but always sort of like chasing the next goal, the next achievement. And, you know, part of what I know you wanted to discuss is goal setting, and it all sort of fits into that. So that's the kind of stuff that I'm trying to do with the podcast. And that's a good example of like somebody outside of running, but whose experience is somewhat parallel to mine as an athlete.
Got it. Okay. Let's just jump into goal setting and like your training. Like, I don't know really anything about running and wouldn't even know how to approach a training program. I mean, I know it's a lot of volume and volume modulation, that kind of thing. Like for you as an ultra runner, do you approach your training with like a volume goal for the week, or how do you do it?
So of course it depends. I have a coach who basically wrote the book on training for ultra marathons. Literally, he wrote the book called Training Essentials for Ultra Running. And, you know, he's sort of like the Mr. Miyagi of the sport. So he's taught me a lot. And I think, you know, for just to give you kind of an example, if I was getting ready for a 100-mile race, of course, like volume is important, and it takes weeks of consistent volume to condition your body and get it the strength and endurance that it needs to cover that distance. But the most important thing that we think about is specificity. So for a 100-mile race, what we try to mimic in training is the terrain that I'm going to encounter in a race. So if it's a really mountainous race, maybe going to Colorado to train for a couple of months. If it's more runnable, I can usually stay here in Portland. You know, if it's flat, sort of doing the training that's necessary to mimic that that terrain as best as I can. Similar with environment. So if it's at altitude, if it's hot, if it's cold, making sure that we train specifically for the task at hand. If it's a shorter race, the same principle applies. The way that it would differ from a 100-mile race, for example, where it's much more about volume and endurance, is that for a shorter race, which for me is still between 30 and 50 miles, so still long by most people's accounts or by most people's opinion, but it's still like, even though because they're shorter, de-emphasizing that like max endurance sort of like slow and steady stuff, and emphasizing more the speed, the strength with speed. So doing harder intervals, hill repeats, things like that. So every training block is a little bit different, but specificity is always the most important thing for us.
Got it. So you do modulate the intensity somewhat depending on the goal, some sprinting, hill running, that kind of thing.
Totally.
Sometimes.
Yep. Yeah. So,
Okay.
so for example, one workout that I do that I absolutely hate, but that is really helpful, is like 8 by 3 minutes full gas uphill. So that's basically running as hard as you can for 3 minutes. You know, like at the end of those 3 minutes, it's sort of like you should be on the verge of absolute implosion. And each interval should basically get slower. So basically they get harder. Because you're supposed to be, it should not be repeatable. You know, if your intervals are repeatable, you're going too slow. So of course, you know, for a race that's 18 hours or whatever, theoretically these 3-minute pushes wouldn't necessarily be specific, right? But what we're doing is trying to, you know, push my aerobic threshold as high as we possibly can. And then what we do as we get closer to the race is reduce the intensity of those intervals. So make them more consistent, more repeatable, rather than, you know, where I should be failing at the end of every one, making them more repeatable, building that strength, that endurance. And, you know, that's sort of like the architecture. So we do some super, super intense stuff, but the closer we get to the race, the more specific we get to that race intensity.
And the metric you probably most often use is mile pace when you're training, or do you go off heart rate? Or
great question. We go off what we call RPE, rate of perceived exertion. And this is a big thing that my coach, as the Mr. Miyagi of ultra running, has really brought into the sport, because ultra running and trail running is so variable. In other words, like no course is the same. And even like if you're running on 2 different trails in the same town, oftentimes that terrain is so different to where pacing, you know, like mileage or, you know, pace at a certain mileage are completely irrelevant, because they just they're not the proper measurement or metric to properly represent your performance. So really for us, it's all about this rate of perceived exertion. It's always very subjective. It's how do you feel at this given pace? And so for those max effort intervals, it's like 10 out of 10, right? For the slower stuff, it's more like 7 or 8 out of 10, where it still feels challenging, still feels hard, but repeatable and consistent.
That's interesting. We used to talk at CrossFit HQ about perceived intensity as a priority for pacing versus, you know, VO2 max or all those other measurements. And, you know, back then people thought that was stupid because it's not the most quantifiable scientific thing. But it kind of reminds me, about 10 years ago or 8 years ago, I trained for this thing called Crash Bees, which is a rowing competition, 2K rowing competition. And I remember it was very painful training, just a lot of lactate threshold and that kind of thing. And the people that I trained with, like, you know, you'd finish a 2K or a 500 or whatever, and you'd fall on the ground and you'd, you know, sizzle like bacon because you're hurting so bad. And I remember some guy whose name I shall not mention was part of a gym in Salt Lake City called Jim Jones. And we'd had this deep, long conversation about how when you finish a really difficult effort, you should do everything in your power to not act like a spaz. Get up, walk around, don't be an asshole. And it made me realize after I did that perceived intensity is a really challenging topic because your body's capable of so much more than what you think. And every time, I guess the question I'm like really screwing up trying to get into here is like, how do you as an athlete work on that perceived, your ability to perceive, right? And like, how do you improve that?
So I think this is a really good point to make because each individual athlete is different and responds better to different types of coaching and different types of prescribed workouts. And for me and my personality, rate of perceived exertion is the perfect thing for me because I've never been a math guy. I've never been a science guy. I've always been like an art guy and how does it make you feel and like, you know, yeah, what were your emotions and things like that rather than like, oh, let's dig into the analytics on a spreadsheet. That's just never been my thing. The funny thing about it is that that's absolutely how my coach operates. He's very much a science guy. He's very much a math guy. And he would love to have a metric that's reliable, like pace or heart rate or wattage, for example, as it relates to cycling that you could use for trail running. And the unfortunate thing for him is that that just doesn't exist yet. There isn't something that exists yet that properly measures that type of thing in a way that would help him as a coach. So the most accurate thing that he can use is our subjective feedback. Okay. But so it's sort of like a bad thing for him, but a really positive thing for me and my personality. There are a lot of people who use different strategies who measure their workouts based on mileage, where I always measure all my training based on time also. So instead of it saying, hey, go run 18 miles today, it's like, go run 3 hours today. It's never about the mileage. It's always about the time. And that's just how I respond better. That's how my brain naturally thinks. But there are athletes also who are very science motivated, very math oriented, who under those circumstances probably wouldn't respond super well. And in those cases, they'll, find a coach who matches them better, based on their own disposition. So it is very individualized. But for me, it's always been something I've been good at getting in touch with. Of course, there have been some workouts where it's supposed to be repeatable, but I've started out too fast. And in that case, that's where you rely on your coach to say, I write after my workout in our Training Peaks training plan, like, hey, this workout sucked. And he'll write back, well, yeah, like, look at this. You went way too hard on this first interval. That's why the fourth one was terrible, because you went a little bit too hard, so it wasn't repeatable. So it is something that you sort of have to dial in and you get to know a little bit better with experience. But for me, I think it's always come naturally to me to sort of fall into the appropriate pacing based on that perceived exertion.
Got it. Okay. So I would love to geek out more about the deep kind of philosophical pieces of this, but I think that for the benefit of the people who are on the call and who are along with me in this ride, I want to talk a little bit about if I were to come to you and say like, hey, I want to run 100 miles before the end of the year, like I want to get into running this, I need, like, what's the first couple critical pieces of advice you would offer me? I mean, you would tell me to lose weight first, but just the general athlete. Speak a bit about that.
No, dude. Yeah, so I think the most important thing is consistency. So, the challenge of running is that, if you lose practice with it, or if you haven't done it in a long time, it's really evident the first time you go out running. It feels really hard. The next day, you're definitely going to feel it, especially as we get older. You get a little bit more sore, you get a little bit more creaky. But with consistency, I think there's very few things that your body adjusts to more quickly than running. So sure. Even though the first couple days, the first week maybe will be kind of difficult to get through, as long as you have some consistency and you don't let that initial soreness dissuade you from keeping consistency with your training. You get better so quickly, and then you sort of ride that momentum and that addictive feeling that we all are familiar with of self-improvement, right? And once you sort of see that in yourself, and once you kind of are able to see it objectively in your training and how quickly you're covering your 4-mile loop around your neighborhood or whatever it is, it becomes much easier to keep that wave of momentum going. So if it's trying to run a couple 100 miles before the end of the year, whatever it is, it's much easier to do that in consistent smaller chunks than in these like heroic efforts that you do like once or twice a week. So for me, consistency is always the key. And then when you really build that over the course of months and then eventually years, if you're lucky enough to stay healthy and motivated and everything, that's when you have like the real breakthroughs in terms of performance. And so it's just like anything else in life. It's just like small steps every day, it's compounding gains in the long term. So yeah, consistency is just crucial.
What about, running is about as natural of a human movement as you could possibly imagine. But there is a lot of ways, especially people who are not big runners, can do it wrong, right? You can get, injured or whatever. Like, what are some of the kind of more technical things that you would advise people to think about if they're engaging in a running program?
So number one would be focus on mobility and stretching, especially again, as we get older. This is something that we naturally lose, especially if, we work in kind of a normal job and we're sitting at desks a lot and commuting and cars and trains and planes. Like our bodies just kind of tense up, especially with stress too. And so I think the thing that pays the biggest dividends in terms of like bang for buck time wise is just devoting 10, 15, 20 minutes every day, every couple of days, whenever you can, to loosen up. And this will not only help you to stay healthier, but also allow your body to move more efficiently when you are running. And so for me, like I now have an intuitive enough understanding of my body where when I'm running, if I'm in the middle of a workout, like I can just feel when I'm more locked up, if my hips are like sitting a little bit behind where I normally want them to. And so then I just, it's almost always a result of just being lazy with the mobility and stretching work, usually, with around my hips and hip flexors and glutes and things like that, the things like around the core of our body, things attaching to our pelvis, where, if all that is moving fluidly, you're naturally, instinctively, the human body knows how to move through these environments. So, if as long as your body can achieve the angles that it needs to move through, it's not trying to compensate for one side of your body that's tighter than the other, then, the act of running down a technical trail is somewhat intuitive, it's somewhat of
Sure.
like an instinct driven thing.
Yeah.
So that would be some advice that I would mention. And sort of like along the lines of that, drinking a shitload of water is, I think, something that's really underappreciated, again, as we get older and as it relates to mobility and flexibility. Our muscles, I think, just naturally lose some of that suppleness and elasticity that we have when we're kids. And so the more we can hydrate them, the more lubricated they are, the more they want to stretch, the less prone they are to like snapping and breaking and things like that. So hydration mixed with mobility and flexibility is, I think, critical.
How do you warm up before you go out to run? What do you do?
Usually I'll do like a little bit of stretching. For me, my ankles have always been the Achilles heel. I've basically had 2 injuries in my entire career. Before I was a runner, I played lacrosse, and I've been healthy my whole career, except for 2 pretty serious ankle injuries, one of which I suffered in the beginning of last year. And so that's the focus for me with my warm up, is making sure my ankles are mobile, going back to my last answer. So I focus on that first and foremost, just a couple really simple exercises. It's just kind of like some basic stretching, and then starting really slow in my run. Yeah, I think there's no shame in that. And with Strava and stuff now, people are so wrapped up in, their average pace or whatever. And, want to start out the run quickly, because otherwise it's going to really negatively impact your overall average pace for the run. I think it's really silly. And the easiest thing to do to warm up is just to start slow.
I so wish Strava was never invented. I hate it.
Oh,
I mean, it's an
really
amazing tool.
Yeah.
But it is like, I mean, I'll finish a bike ride and I'll be like, oh, I didn't turn my Strava on. No one will know about this grand adventure I just went on. I wanted to talk about your injuries just a little bit, because, we have got about, 86 days in a wake up before the end of the year. That's the time horizon for our challenge. And inevitably, everybody at some point, myself included, will screw up, right? And for me, it might just be not logging my food for the day, or missing a workout or whatever. I'm also about to have a child, so that's going to throw a wrench in the gears. What kind of advice do you give to people about rebounding from a misstep as you progress towards an ultimate goal? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's consistency, right? And we all have to acknowledge that perfection is unachievable. And I think I don't think I've ever had a training block where I've absolutely nailed everything. And there's always some, especially when you're have a lot of your identity caught up in being faster than people in races, for example. There's a tendency to be really self-critical when you make mistakes like that, or even if you just have a bad day, or you're just in the gym and you're not feeling it and you just kind of bail on your workout, or just go through the motions just to check it off the list. I don't think there's anything to be embarrassed in that regard. And it's something that everybody deals with, whether it's in sport or in professional life or in family life. Sometimes it's just hard work, and sometimes you screw up. And again, it's just all about consistency and understanding that the gains come over the long term, not over the short term. And so as long as your trajectory is aimed in that direction, and you don't start being consistent in the wrong way, right? As long as the bad days or the shortcuts don't become consistent, then, you're still heading in the right direction.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Aaron Lutzi's goal in this challenge is to drop a couple % body fat. He's already very lean dude, and he's, looking to be 10% or less, I believe. Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong there. So Aaron, whereas mine is everything's working, right? Because in the beginning, everything works. But with someone like Aaron, he's kind of at the other end of the spectrum, where he's got to do almost everything right to get that body fat percentage. Talk about for yourself, who has to occasionally run 100 miles in a row, or these really hard FKTs, you're kind of squeezing out the last ounces of performance in your body. What's that like? I mean, I've never been even remotely close to that kind of performance in anything. What's it like to be in that range?
I think this is what fascinates me most about sports, is that it really is like a 360-degree thing that contributes to the ultimate moment of truth, right? And the training is a big part of that, but it's definitely not the only part of that. Yep. And so, and then again, recognizing that these little things and consistency with the little things are what really add up, So when we think about running, the training and the big hard workouts and the 7-hour long runs that you accumulate are incredibly important for building the specific adaptations to whatever race performance that you have on the horizon and whatever your goals are at that race. But in addition to that training, there's so many things that you can do to make yourself a better athlete. And, for me, I think that the most important thing to really pay attention to is like what's going on in the internal life, right? And making sure that that part is balanced with the physical part of it. And so this is actually something that I'm working on now, a different project that's sort of bringing these two things together, the physical fitness and what we call the emotional fitness. And so, making sure that you're turning down the dial on like the stressful, shitty things in the world. So stop doom scrolling on Twitter. If you've got a friend who, always like is complaining about stuff, maybe just like say, hey, I'm going to be busy for a few weeks. Let's pick up our conversations at a different time. Doing your daily reading, your meditation, the things that like actually make you feel good and whole as a person, hanging out with your family, doing the stuff that like makes your internal life feel good. I think that has such a huge performance enhancing quality to it. And if you can match that with like really good training and motivation, like that's when you have these insane breakthroughs. And so those two things are the biggest, things that you can unlock to achieve great things. And then there's still a million other things, going back to this 360-degree thing, in addition to internal life and physical fitness is like, being hydrated, do your stretching, do your strength work, stay mobile. There's so many different things that you can do to achieve your best results. And when you feel like you knock it out of the park, there's no better feeling in the world, but it's so freaking rare that you knock it out of the park. And that's why it's so addictive, because there's always something you can do better.
Yeah. Jerry Seinfeld has this really funny joke. I can't remember exactly how it goes, but he's talking about the 100-meter dash in the Olympics. And he's talking about the guy who loses it by like a millisecond, and he like flashes back to like the handful of M&Ms he ate the week before, and he's like, it was the damn M&Ms. I love that joke. But I'm glad you talked about the people you surround yourself with, because I have recently been thinking, and like everybody's watching the show The Social Dilemma, and everybody's, I've been thinking a lot, especially with this challenge, is like I need to do a better job of surrounding myself with people who are positive, who kind of live the life that I actually aspire to live, and that keep me headed in the right direction. What is that? What's that been like for you in your training or in your running career? Like obviously you have Aaron, who's a great influence on all of us. How do you keep those like remarkable people in your life? Your wife's obviously one of those as well. How do you keep that like little tribe going? How do you weed those people out too?
Yeah, I mean, I've been really blessed to be surrounded by really great people throughout my career, and like who have kind of fallen into my life at really opportune times. And yeah, the social dilemma thing I think is also like something that I think viscerally aware of now after watching the film, and particularly with like kind of the state of the world, is just like recognizing how much of a toll that was actually taking on me, to just like feel like I have to be paying attention to all this stuff at all times. Otherwise, I'm, may not be as informed as, my neighbor or whatever. And actually realizing like this is having a negative impact on you. And
yeah.
And you've been doing it for years. And I was actually telling Lucy about this last week when we were running, but going back to doom scrolling on Twitter is I haven't deleted it off my phone, but I moved it to the very back screen on my iPhone. So I'm like never going on anymore. And of course the algorithm recognizes it and starts sending me these notifications that I never signed up for, saying, hey, you missed this post from Aaron Lutzi, or, whatever. Come back. And it was the first time where I really was like, oh my gosh, like I have been under a spell for a long time. And so that's just one piece of it, is like, okay, this is not contributing to your success as an athlete, nor is it contributing to your mental health as a human being. And then, yeah, thinking about, the people that you surround yourself with, and really nurturing relationships with the people that, really matter. And so, for me, I've been lucky, really lucky to have, the partnerships that I've had with brands, including Aaron Lucia. We keep talking about him, but I really, truly feel like he's not only my manager, but like a friend who has my best interest at heart at all times, and somebody who I like have total trust in, and who, I know is like cheering for me and rooting for me, and like knows what my goals are and supports me, and like hurts for me when I get injured and whatever. It makes a real difference, and it helps us to feel, more committed and invested as athletes as well. And so now, like, I've been kind of spoiled by that. My other main sponsor is the North Face, also a great brand to work with. But like, I actively now kind of like turn away every opportunity that I have, unless I really feel that level of mutual support. Because otherwise it's just sort of like another obligation that I just don't really need, and that will take more energy from me than it will provide. And so that goes for, sponsorships, it goes for friendships. Really focusing on the inputs that we have on a personal level, not only digitally, but the people we surround ourselves with.
Sure. Yeah. I'm a big fan of the idea that if everybody could focus in on and improve their own lives a little bit more consistently, the whole world would be a better place. Everyone would have maybe far less outrage for the things that they can't control, because they're working on the things they can control. And this is kind of like the like heart of the reason why I wanted to bring people together to like try to do something productive for ourselves, is because it feels like there's so much out of our control right now, but you do have absolute control over one thing, and that's your emotions and what you do to yourself, right? Your body, whatever. And I wish more people would take that on, especially in this environment. Like how, in this kind of like bad segue, but like in the COVID world, I assume you've had events canceled and projects canceled and kind of one roadblock after another over the course of the last 6 or 8 months. Well, how's that affected your career, and like how are you dealing with that?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, you're totally right. Is that, and this is something my wife and I have been talking about a lot, is like really need to put a lot less emphasis on the stuff that we can't control. And this, of course, ties back in obviously with the whole social dilemma thing and all the things that are happening around the world. And instead of being totally dismayed by what seems to be a pattern happening in our country and around the world on a lot of levels, focusing more on what I can do to make a difference. So, instead of spending time feeling gross reading the news, spend my time making phone calls or donating to causes that I believe in, spending time helping people in my community. It just makes so much difference to our mental health, to like really stop beating ourselves over the head with stuff that we have no control over. And as it relates to COVID, I think I would have had a much harder time dealing with this whole situation had I not gone through the year from hell last year, when I got horribly injured a couple of times, tried to get back into it way too quickly because I felt all this pressure to get back, self-imposed pressure. It's not as if Red Bull or anybody else was saying, hey, we need you back at it. It was more like me having a bit of like a existential crisis of like, I need to get back to it. Otherwise, I'm a waste of time, a waste of space sort of thing. And so, that experience and having gotten through it and feeling healthy and feeling back to being myself on a personal level as well, I think has helped me deal with the challenges of COVID a lot better, including races being canceled. And yeah, like losing opportunities to travel and compete and whatever. So, I mean, it's impacting everybody's career in a much more significant way, I think, than it impacts mine. I really obviously miss the normal world, as we all do, and hope that we get back to it eventually. But, you know, in the grand scheme of things, I can't really complain. I've been able to devote a lot more time this summer to just personal exploration. I did this FKT project this summer around Mount Rainier that I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation. That was just absolutely amazing. The outcome was, you know, a little disappointing because the guy broke my record so quickly, but it was like really a good use of my time and something that I got a lot of personal satisfaction out of, that also satisfied a little bit of this competitive drive. So it's all about finding the things that you can do, finding the small victories every day, and yeah, you know, keeping faith that eventually with good decisions and you know, keeping your head in the right place, that hopefully things will come back around.
Yeah, for sure. I want to be sensitive about your time here, and I hoped to just chat for about 45 minutes, and then if there are a couple questions from the crowd, I wanted to open it up. But real quick, Lucy, anything you wanted to add about you know, your experience with Dylan, or any questions I screwed up horribly here?
I think you did great, Chris. No, honestly, I mean, Dylan has been my running coach for the last several years and helped me make it through to some pretty audacious goals. I went from not running to running 50 miles on a regular basis. And last weekend, we proved that you could run an ultra marathon with just your heart and mind. So,
what does that mean?
We literally
tell them what we did. Tell them what we did last weekend.
We did zero training because of the smoke and fires, but we still ran 32 miles and about 7,200 feet of elevation, and survived.
I forgot. So, yeah, you guys have had some serious air quality issues over there, huh?
We had the most amazing day ever, going around Mount St. Helens on the Lewitt Trail, which does a full circumnavigation of Mount St. Helens. Lucy and I tagged that last weekend. It was amazing.
That's super cool. Cool. If you are on this call and you have a comment or a question for Dylan, feel free to just use the little hand raise thing built into this incredible technology. Actually, I see Jake actually raised his hand, so I'm going to call on him first. He did the physical hand raise thing. Go ahead, Jake.
All right. First, thanks for your time, yourself and Aaron. Thanks for putting this together, Chris. So myself, I'd never really heard of ultra marathon running and the extreme sport that it is until I read David Goggins' book, Can't Hurt Me. I'm sure you've come across that reference more than once being in the sport. Yeah. So it seems to me that his situation and how he broke into the sport and the excruciating pain he went through his first few races is out of the ordinary compared to how most athletes get into it. Or is that something you see on a regular basis where people really shoot their shot and give it their all?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's like really hard and traumatic on the body the first few times that you do it. And Goggins' story is, I think, a little bit unique in that, if I'm not mistaken, he basically like heard of the Badwater race, which is in Death Valley. And in order to even get into the race, he had to do, I think, 12 hours or the equivalent of that in some other capacity before they would let him into the race. And so like the next week, he went from not running at all to running 12 hours, which is definitely not the typical traditional preparation for a race of that distance. And I'm not surprised it had some pretty negative or at least painful consequences. And so, yeah, I mean, like, I think two things. Like, number one, yeah, it's hard, but number two, it's not nearly as hard as it sounds, right? Like, it sounds much crazier to say, oh, I signed up for this 100-mile race than it is to actually go do it. It's not to say that, like, most people could do what Goggins did. I don't think that's the case, but with some preparation and some training, you'd be shocked at, like, if you went to a finish line of the Leadville 100, for example, at the cutoff, so 29 hours to the 30-hour cutoff, you'd see people crossing the finish line who you would never think had run a step in their lives, totally normal looking people, in their 60s, 70s, who basically walk the whole thing. And so it really is all about that, like, internal drive. And then, of course, the higher your personal ambitions are, so if you want to win a race, it's obviously going to take a lot more than if you want to just finish it. And so, yeah, like, Goggins is an absolute savage, right? Like, he's just toughness personified. And I don't think that's necessarily the best way to approach the sport, but it's absolutely possible to go off the couch and do an ultra marathon, as Aaron Lutzy proved last weekend.
That's awesome. I appreciate the answer.
Aaron is a David Goggins. I don't see any other hands raised, but anybody feel free to speak up. Oh, we got one. Go ahead, Ben.
Hey, what's up? I guess any advice on keeping it simple with training plans and recordings and, like, analyzing kind of what you're doing? Like, I've got the Wahoo app and I've got the Strava app, and I can do an Excel spreadsheet, and you can just do so much, but how do you just help keep it simple, and what advice do you have on that?
Well, I think it depends on what your goal is. Are you a runner or a cyclist, or
A bit of both. My
just
goal
one?
is going to be running.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, keeping it, I mean, that's the beauty of running, right? Is it's like the gear necessary to do it is super minimal. It doesn't need to be good weather to go do it. Virtually everybody can just leave their house. It takes 5 minutes to get dressed, as opposed to cycling, where it takes a little bit longer. And so the simplicity of running, I think, is inherent in the activity, and it leads to the addiction and the enjoyment of the activity. And so depending on what your goals are, I think that overcomplicating things is to your detriment, and consistency is sort of like the most important thing that you can achieve, in my opinion. So, whether you're trying to run a marathon in a couple months, or you're just trying to kind of like accumulate miles, the best thing that you can do is, just get out the door for a little bit every day. Don't necessarily feel like you need to do this exact workout at this exact date in order to maximize some adaptation, unless, like, you really want to get serious and you have huge goals for yourself, and then the specialization comes, and then the simplicity I think is decreased a little bit. So, I mean, for me, just focusing on the act of getting out the door every day is 1A, and then the results sort of go from there. And as your fitness builds, again, it goes back to this rate of perceived exertion thing, and just being in touch with that intuitive level of your athletic abilities, as well as, like, on days that you feel like you've got extra energy, by all means, man, throw in some harder efforts, because I think just kind of listening to those natural rhythms of your body is helpful as well. So that goes for like what time of day you train. So for me, like I almost always train first thing in the morning because I know that's when I feel my best. And after like 9 o'clock in the morning, I always just like don't feel as good when I'm training. And so, you know, keeping it simple by maximizing that to the extent that I can. And on days where I feel great, not being afraid to push a little bit more. On days when I don't feel so good, not forcing it to come.
Ben's goal is actually a sub 5-minute track mile. So I was going to actually talk about this a little bit. Aside from just like jabbing hot pokers in his legs, I don't know how else he's going to get prepared. But talk about a little bit about. We only got a few more minutes here, but like let's say it's early December and he's like, I think I got it today. Maybe I should try. Like, how detrimental can it be if you give that effort too early? You know, you might wake up after Thanksgiving full of turkey and like, today's the day. So how would you encourage him to think about that?
Oh, I mean, that's why we do it, man. It's like, you know, you never know when it's going to be your day, right? And so, I mean, with racing, you always know months in ahead, okay, this is my day, right? And with now, you know, with personal challenges in the age of COVID, when we're doing our you know, personal time trials rather than track races, you have to, be kind of selective of when you have that special effort. And to me, I don't like that as much. I like to have, going back to our goal setting conversation, like I like to know when the goal's coming. And I think this is something I kind of screwed up with my recent project on the Wonderland Trail at Mount Rainier. Is I feel like I picked the wrong day. It was a day that was just too hot. You know, it wasn't fast conditions. And, you know, had I chosen a different day to go, I think I could have gone a lot faster. But, you know, it's always like a hindsight is 20/20 kind of thing. And, you know, usually I have a good sense of if I'm ready for a really good effort, like if I'm going to have a really good race or not. And I think that's something that sort of comes with experience, but I also think it's something that most people have at least some peripheral ability to identify in themselves too. And, you know, if you're capable of running a sub 5-minute mile, I'm sure you've got a little bit of that in you as well. And so, yeah, I mean, I'd put a date on the calendar and then maybe give yourself a few days wiggle room, but at least you're pointing towards a specific date. And, you know, if you're not feeling it the day before, you can push it back a little bit. But it's always a guessing game, you know, what day is going to be the right day. And you just hope your good day lines up with the day that it goes. But
yeah, for sure. That's
easier
sports.
said than done. Yep.
Cool. Well, we're almost out of time here. Does anybody else have anything they want to ask?
I'll throw a quick one. Jed,
Jed, go ahead.
All right. I'll be quick. Hey, thank you both. You mentioned drinking a shitload of water. Could you quantify that? Maybe is that 100 ounces a day? Like what do you think would be a good goal for someone? And then also maybe just give some quick tips or thoughts on the mental aspect of a newbie or amateur runner that's kind of getting into it. Like, how do you kind of break through those mental barriers that I run into, you know, when I go out or I try and get back into kind of endurance type efforts?
Mm-hmm. I would probably say I would guess at least a gallon of water a day. And I also I'll have usually some electrolyte supplement like a noon tab or something once a day too. Usually in the summer it's maybe more than that, you know, if it's hot. But I think you should be less focused on how much you're drinking and more like just always having it around, you know, so that you feel compelled to have sips. And I think I used to be more in the camp of like, fill up a 20-ounce bottle and just chug it 5-6 times a day, as opposed to like really just keeping the intake going slow and steady all day. So yeah, keep it available. I think that's the best hack to staying better hydrated, is just like get a bottle, keep it around you all the time. And keep one in your car. Like I always have a gallon full of water in my truck at all times. And, I'll go through it every few days and then I refill it, put it back in my truck. And so I just have water available. And then, to the mental side of things, I mean, this is tough, right? I think it's all about like how much you want it and how much it means to you, right? So if the goal is to lose a little bit of weight, like you have to actually want to do that. If your goal is to break 3 hours in the marathon or whatever, it's like, okay, you're always going to have opportunities to bail. You're always going to have the sort of like nagging doubt in the back of your head of like, is this worth it or whatever? And, I just think that the feeling of like these long-term commitments where you achieve something at the end is like just so freaking cool. And it just provides so much value. Not only like in the moment, but in the future when you like are confronted with a different challenge and you're like, well, I was able to achieve this other goal that I had 2 years ago. Why couldn't I do this now? And when you constantly set these goals, work towards them, and then achieve them, it has, I think, just a really huge value in your personal life as well, in your professional life, with your family. It just helps you deal with everything. And so that's the motivation that I use, is like just knowing that the hard work does pay off, even if it's not in the exact form that you expect it to in that moment. Like for example, like my run this summer, where I had the record for 5 whole days, broke the record by an hour and a half, and then had the record for 5 whole days. It was like, man, and right afterwards, I was like, man, I was second guessing myself. Man, I screwed that up so bad. There were so many different things I could have done. I should have gone on a cooler day, yada, yada, yada. And then ultimately I had the guy who broke my record on my podcast, and it turned into this awesome conversation that people really enjoyed. And I got so many amazing messages from people just saying like, wow, that was so cool that you guys were able to sit down and talk through all that. And it made me realize like, this is probably having a bigger impact, even though like I'm not the one who has the record anymore. And so it's allowing me to contribute in different ways. And so that hard work still paid off in the end. It wasn't a total waste of time, to have my record taken. It just allowed me to contribute in a different way. So, motivation's always the hardest part, I think. And it has to be somewhat organic. You can't force it.
Yeah, for sure. Out of respect for Dylan's time here, we're going to call it. Dylan, thank you so much for doing this. And I hope we get to hang out soon.
Yeah, I hope so too. Good luck to everybody in their personal challenges. It was great to chat, and have a great rest of the year.
Cool. Thanks, buddy. See ya. See ya, everybody. Thanks for joining.
See ya.
Thanks.
Bye.